In the last 72 hours, 3 courtroom witnesses broke their silence. One admitted they feared for their life after working for Diddy. What began as whispers behind velvet ropes just turned into a legal thunderstorm. Today, we break down how the prosecution unraveled a decades-long persona and what Diddy's final reaction reveals about more than just guilt. Would you risk everything to speak out against someone with untouchable power? Let me know your thoughts below. Diddy stepped into the courtroom like he owned it. Tailored suit, controlled smile, the swagger of a man who'd faced headlines and walked away clean every time. To the untrained eye, it looked like confidence. But behind the scenes, federal investigators had spent nearly a year compiling evidence, tracking whispers, and piecing together contradictions. He wasn't walking into a trial. He was walking into a trap he didn't see coming. The power of presence can mask the weight of consequence. Reputation buys you time, not immunity. And in that room, the clock finally caught up. Most celebrities flaunt their real estate, oceanfront views, luxury compounds, but this one, tucked away in the Caribbean, unnamed in any public register. When federal agents raided the estate, they found encrypted hard drives, burner phones, and flight logs with dates that aligned all too neatly with major industry parties and events. It wasn't just a house, it was a vault. One document alone sparked a second investigation. Another had names redacted so aggressively, even the judge raised an eyebrow. The more private the paradise, the louder the secrets. She disappeared in 2017. No warning, no goodbye, no trace. Once Diddy's trusted assistant, she handled sensitive bookings, private travel, and unlisted communication. For years, her absence was whispered about, but never addressed publicly. Then, shocking, she walked into the courtroom and took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described being silenced through legal threats and intimidation. She spoke of nights she slept with her phone off, afraid of being tracked, followed, or worse. Her story wasn't just a memory, it was a missing puzzle. Disappearing doesn't mean forgetting. In just 45 minutes of testimony, she shifted the entire tone of the trial. The jury, their faces changed. Suddenly, this wasn't about tabloids, it was about survival. Everyone expected her to defend him. After all, she raised him, watched him rise, and stood by him through every scandal. But when Diddy's mother entered the courtroom and took the stand, the silence was heavy. Her voice cracked as she began. She didn't outright condemn her son, but she didn't protect him either. There are things I chose not to see, she admitted, tears welling up. She spoke of guilt, pride, of boundaries crossed too often. Her testimony didn't need to be explosive. It was real, honest, human. Sometimes, the deepest cuts come from those close. Her presence didn't break the case, but it shook the foundation. And for Diddy, it was the first time his armor truly cracked. Behind every scandal is a money trail, and this one was complicated. Prosecutors revealed a web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and anonymous transfers that made even seasoned investigators pause. Some payments were routed through obscure entities in the Cayman Islands. Others flowed through luxury business fronts with no actual service. One forensic accountant said it was the most deliberately obscured financial operation they'd seen from a private citizen. These weren't just transactions, they were smokescreens. Complexity doesn't equal legitimacy. The deeper they dug, the more connections they found to closed-door events, undisclosed settlements, and unregistered property. The courtroom wasn't just hearing about Diddy's actions, it was uncovering his infrastructure, and piece by piece, it was unraveling. Midway through the trial, the courtroom received an anonymous letter, typewritten, unsigned, but chillingly specific. It referenced names, dates, private conversations, and threats that hadn't been mentioned publicly. One line read, "They warned me not to talk. I'm talking anyway." The prosecution requested to admit it as evidence. The judge allowed it, reluctant. But then witness number 7 took the stand and confirmed every detail. She nodded slowly as each line was read aloud, eyes never leaving Diddy. Secrets don't stay hidden when fear fades. That testimony changed the courtroom energy. Jurors leaned in, Diddy leaned back. The letter wasn't just a document, it was a crack in the silence. And from there, more noise followed. He'd been with Diddy for over a decade, quiet, loyal, invisible. But when the guard took the stand, his voice shook. He described after-parties where phones were collected, security cameras turned off, and certain rooms were off-limits, even to him. He claimed to have once walked in by mistake and been immediately reassigned. When asked why he never spoke out before, he answered, "Because I thought loyalty meant silence. Loyalty built on fear isn't loyalty at all." His story wasn't the most shocking, but it was the most believable, and that made it dangerous. The courtroom no longer saw Diddy as untouchable. They saw him as someone who controlled the room and erased the evidence. Before anyone knew what the final sentence would be, the judge issued a stern press. In a calm but pointed tone, He spoke of patterns of coercion, calculated misuse of power, and a long-standing culture of silence that had allowed certain figures to avoid scrutiny. He made it clear. This wasn't just about punishing one man, it was about re-establishing trust in the legal system. Justice isn't revenge, it's restoration. And when the judge leaned forward and said, "This court is not blind to celebrity," the room tense. It was the first public signal that leniency was off the table. Everyone felt it. Something serious was coming. If this breakdown has you rethinking how justice and fame collide, now's the time. Tap the like button to help push this conversation further. Your engagement tells the algorithm these stories matter. And if you want more no-spin deep dives like this one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're just getting started. Behind closed doors, Diddy's own defense team was fractured. According to insider reports, half the lawyers wanted to negotiate a plea early on, something discreet, low impact. The other half believed they could beat the case outright. That internal conflict caused delays, missed opportunities, and ultimately, the rejection of a deal that might have saved him years. One anonymous associate put it bluntly. It stopped being about strategy. It became about ego. Ego in court is a losing argument. The jury didn't hear these details, but they felt the crack. The defense came off scattered, defensive, uncoordinated. In a case this high profile, unity isn't optional, it's survival. At first, public sentiment leaned toward Diddy. Fans flooded comment sections with support, praising his legacy and questioning the motives of accusers. But then the leaks began. A series of audio clips and video fragments, some from years ago, surfaced online. They weren't graphic, but they were cold, calculated, and real. Hashtags shifted overnight. Even diehard supporters went silent. Reputation is rented, truth is owned. One fan post said it best. "I wanted to believe the music, but now I hear something else." The internet didn't convict him, but it did change the climate. And jurors noticed. No one lives outside the algorithm anymore. Sometimes, your past testifies against. During closing arguments, prosecutors played a clip from an old radio interview, an offhand moment from over a decade. Diddy laughs, then says, "They'll never catch me. I'm too smart for that." It was meant to be a joke, but in that courtroom, it didn't land that. The jury didn't hear confidence, they heard arrogance. The moment was brief, but the damage was. Arrogance ages poorly in court. Even Diddy seemed to regret. He looked down, then away, as the audio echoed. Sometimes, the words you forget are the ones that define, especially when you said them into a mic. In the aftermath of that clip, silence shattered. One by one, former collaborators began to. Retired tour manager tweeted, "We all knew things didn't feel right." The next producer said, "The signs were there. I just looked away." These weren't tabloid headlines. They were insiders peeling back the curtain. For years, careers had been built around not asking questions. Now, that loyalty was dissolving in real. Silence is complicity wrapped in fear. None of them claimed direct involvement, but their admissions carried weight. When the machine around you starts crumbling, even whispers become thunder. And in Diddy's case, the storm was now deafening. The air in the courtroom was thick. No murmurs, no movement, just raw anticipation. Diddy sat motionless, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed ahead. The judge began reading. Words like willful, repeated, and with intent echoed through the chamber. Then came the number, the year. The room seemed to freeze. Diddy's jaw clenched, his expression faltered. Not rage, not denial, just shock. For the first time, even his most confident supporters couldn't mask their unease. You don't prepare for a sentence like that. Cameras outside flashed. Reporters raced for signals. But inside, the silence was louder than the verdict itself. It wasn't just a punishment. It was the breaking point of a persona. What followed wasn't chaos. It was disbelief. One juror sobbed. A journalist gasped loud enough to echo. Someone dropped a glass bottle, shatter punctuating the moment. Diddy's legal team sat frozen, eyes scanning one another with no words to offer. His mother, stoic until then, lowered her head and covered her. Everyone expected drama. No one expected stillness. Real impact doesn't explode. It sinks in. Court officers stepped forward, cuffed Diddy, and quietly escorted him away. He didn't struggle. He didn't. Just one long glance over his shoulder at the people who once built his world. Then, gone. As he approached the exit, Diddy paused, just for a second. No outburst, no last words. But he turned, slowly, and locked eyes with his mother. That glance was heavy. Not defiance, not regret. Something in between. Maybe disbelief, maybe betrayal. Or maybe the realization that the life he once controlled was no longer his. Cameras didn't catch the moment. But those inside the courtroom would talk about it for years. Sometimes the loudest moments are completely silent. He didn't say goodbye, he didn't plead, but that final look lingered. In a world built on image, it was the one frame no publicist could spin. The trial is over, but the story is. Legal analysts predict a lengthy appeal, but few believe it'll reverse the outcome. Behind the scenes, new investigations are reportedly underway. The financial forensics alone could spawn separate federal charges. Meanwhile, music industry insiders say a quiet reckoning has begun. Contracts dropped, partnerships frozen, charity boards distancing themselves. One man sentenced, a whole culture under review. And then there's the public, divided. Some still defend, others demand more. But no one's ignoring it anymore. The question isn't just what Diddy did, it's what everyone around him allowed, and whether this is the end or just the beginning. In the days following the sentencing, the outside world didn't pause. It fractured. Major brands began removing Diddy's image from past campaigns. One global fashion house deleted entire archives. Streaming platforms quietly shifted playlists. Even industry events started rewriting guest lists, distancing themselves in real time. But it wasn't just corporate reaction, it was personal too. Former friends stopped answering calls. Collaborators ghosted ongoing projects. Diddy's inner circle shrank fast. What once felt like empire loyalty now looked more like self-preservation. Meanwhile, social media fed on every update. Threads dissected old award speeches. Podcasts speculated on what else was buried. What made this different wasn't the trial, it was how fast the world moved on. And Diddy? For the first time in decades, he wasn't the center. He was the cautionary tale. Even with a sentence delivered and the headlines fading, questions kept piling up. Who else knew? What else was covered up? An ex-employee claimed there were backups, files, videos, journals, hidden in a safety deposit box somewhere overseas. Investigators haven't confirmed it, but the rumor alone reignited media frenzy. Meanwhile, other alleged victims began speaking privately to reporters, off the record but full of detail. The justice system may have spoken, but the full truth felt just out of reach. And in that vacuum, conspiracy theories bloomed. Some believed he was protected for years by higher power. Others questioned whether the sentence was enough. One former producer whispered to a journalist, "You don't build that kind of empire alone." It wasn't about one man anymore. It was about the network. And that web, once invisible, was starting to glimmer under the spotlight. Soon, attention shifted from Diddy to the people around his managers, agents, even bodyguards. Journalists began asking why no one had stepped in. A former tour accountant was subpoenaed after financial records showed he approved unusual overseas transfers. Another longtime employee vanished from social media entirely. The narrative was no longer about one man's guilt. It was about collective silence. Whispers surfaced that two music executives might be next in line for questions. One had signed off on NDAs used to silence potential accusers. The other allegedly helped cover up an incident at a private event in 2012. It was a slow implosion. One by one, the dominoes that once stood so neatly behind a star were tilted. The spotlight was expanded, and suddenly no one wanted to be close enough to feel its heat. For years, the media fed the red carpet interviews, glowing profiles, mogul status headlines. It all shaped a public figure larger than life. But now, those same outlets scrambled to distance themselves. Archived articles were quietly edited. Old interviews were recaptured. A major entertainment network even issued a statement acknowledging their role in platforming unchecked power. When the narrative changes, history gets rewritten. Some journalists admitted they had heard rumors but lacked proof. Others confessed they were pressured to keep it light when covering Diddy. It was no longer about fame, it was about credibility. And in a digital world where nothing stays buried, the receipts were everywhere. Viewers weren't just angry at Diddy, they were angry at the machine that cheered while it looked the other way. Away from the headlines and hashtags, Diddy's family was facing a quieter storm. His children, once staples of red carpets and family-friendly interviews, vanished from the public eye. No statements, no social posts, just silence. One anonymous source close to the family said, "They're not just grieving the sentence, they're grieving the image." When a legacy crumbles, it buries more than one person. His eldest son reportedly canceled a business line. Another pulled out of a reality show. Their last name, once an asset, had become a weight. Friends described them as shocked, angry, and confused. Some questioned whether they ever truly knew the man behind the fame. And perhaps that was the real tragedy. Not what the world lost, but what they never fully had. Just when the headlines began to fade, a sealed motion was filed in a separate jurisdiction. No names, no details, but sources close to the case say it involves one of Diddy's former properties and new cooperating witnesses. The phrase alone reignited speculation. Was there another case building in the shadows? Prosecutors wouldn't comment, but legal analysts noted the pattern. First the main target, then the order. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in waves. A second investigation wouldn't just reopen wounds, it could deepen. Some say it might expose others still hiding behind contracts, NDAs, and years of carefully crafted silence. Diddy's sentence may have closed one chapter, but in the background, another door just creaked open. This time, more people might be standing behind it. Diddy's fall wasn't just a celebrity scandal, it became a mirror. Fans began rewatching old music videos, rereading lyrics, rethinking what they'd once celebrated. Online threads filled with questions. How many other icons were protected by the same silence? How many systems let charisma override accountability? In barbershops, classrooms, studios, the conversations changed. Accountability wasn't cancel culture, it was overdue culture. A documentary filmmaker announced a project titled The Cost of Silence. Universities began adding modules on fame, power, and institutional protection. This wasn't about tearing down legacies for the sake of it. It was about understanding how they were built and at whose expense. The fall of one man had triggered a cultural audit, and for the first time, people were taking notes. Inside prison walls, far from flashing cameras, Diddy was no longer a mogul. He was just another no entourage, no privilege, just time. According to a guard who spoke under anonymity, Diddy spent his early days mostly quiet, requesting books and legal files. But one detail stood out. He never called anyone, not his lawyers, not his family, not even his team. He just stared. Regret doesn't always. Sometimes it just sits still. There were no statements of innocence, no grand declaration, just silence thick enough to fill the cell. Maybe it was strategy, maybe it was shock, or maybe, for the first time, the man who built a world around control was forced to sit with the one person he couldn't outrun, himself. Back on the outside, the people who once orbited Diddy faced their own mirror. One former label partner quietly deleted photos, interviews, collaborations, years of shared history erased in minutes. Others turned to lawyers, unsure of what they might be called to answer for next. The industry that once protected its own was now shredding alliances fast. Echo chambers only work when no one dares to. Now, the silence was gone. Artists who once cited Diddy as inspiration now dodged questions. No one wanted to be the last person defended. The empire had fallen, but the fallout was still moving outward, fast, and with no signs of stopping. In a world obsessed with reinvention, some stories don't get rebranded. Diddy's final image won't be a stage performance or luxury campaign. It will be a courtroom snapshot, a look of disbelief, a quiet exit in change. But beyond the man, the deeper story is about a culture that let it happen. The enabler, the silence, the applause that drowned out warning. Legacy isn't built in moments of triumph, it's tested in collapse. This wasn't just a celebrity downfall, it was a blueprint, a warning, and a record. Because fame can sell you anything, but it can't buy you back your name once the truth walks in and sits down. In the end, Diddy's story became more than just a trial. It became a turning point, a reminder that no amount of influence, money, or history can outrun consequence forever. The music might still play, but the silence between the notes says something else. And as new names surface, new voices speak, and more questions rise. Remember, this isn't over. We'll be watching. Not professional advice. Consult a qualified expert as needed.